Hello and welcome to Views on News. I'm Jawad Tehami. Pakistan's Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Mr. Saeed says, let me quote, there can be no peace in the Middle East without justice for the Palestinians. Israeli actions in Gaza are a genocidal war and a stain on the conscience of humanity, unquote. Israeli brutality continues unabated against innocent people in Gaza, with the bombardment unabated continuing on schools as well as hospitals. Now, the Commissioner General of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency says, let me quote, the new aid distribution system has become a killing field. The system falls far from abiding to the principles of humanity. Instead of orderly food distribution, this system brings dehumanization, chaos and death, unquote. On the other side, we have seen Qatar urging Israel and Hamas to seize the window of opportunity for a truce in Gaza. Likewise, Egypt says that it is pushing for a 60-day ceasefire in Gaza. Earlier, President Donald Trump had said, let me quote, we think within the next week we are going to get a ceasefire, unquote. We've also seen at the same time, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has come under immense pressure at home, especially from the opposition, which believes Netanyahu is using the ongoing war in Gaza to get an end to his corruption trial. It is also pertinent to mention that a district court in Jerusalem has cancelled hearings which were scheduled for this particular week against Netanyahu, facing trial on the charges of bribery, fraud and breach of trust after President Donald Trump termed the trial as a political witch hunt. We'll be talking about all these major developments in this particular show. For that, we are honored to be joined in the studio by Mr. Vice retired Ijaz Malik, senior analyst. Mr. Malik, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Also in the studio, we are honored to be joined by Mr. Ahmed Hassan Awan, foreign affairs expert. Mr. Awan, thank you very much for your time also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Later on in the show, we'll be joined by other participants. As they join in, I'll be introducing them as well. Mr. Malik, where should we actually start from? There are so many developments happening as the situation that develops in Gaza owing to the unabated brutality and aggression and indiscriminate bombardment on the part of the Israeli regime and its forces. Let's specifically talk about this particular a statement that has been given by the Commissioner General of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency regarding the new aid distribution system. We know for a fact that earlier a ceasefire was reached between Israel and Hamas, which was of course brokered by the US, Qatar and Egypt. That came into effect on 19th of January, and hardly for 2 months it held. There was a breach of that particular ceasefire on the part of Israel. Ever since, there has been a complete blockade. The United Nations agencies are not allowed to distribute aid within that particular enclave. It is the new system which this particular thing is being manifested, as this particular statement has come from the Commissioner General of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. Let me quote that one again. The new aid distribution system has become a killing field. Instead of orderly food distribution, this system brings dehumanization, chaos and death. I want your understanding regarding as to the current situation on the ground, as to the access of the innocent Gazans towards the humanitarian aid is concerned.
Yes, it is very unfortunate. After the conflict with Iran and the statements in the aftermath given by President Trump, there was, now I would say, a false hope that maybe the crisis in the Gaza would have some hopes for all stakeholders, and particularly for the plight of the innocent people who are in the shortage of medical supplies, even food and milk, children. But what happened afterward, in fact, we have seen a very well augmented strikes and all possible methods which are being used to curb the freedoms and the very survival of these people. And obviously the statement that you have read from the United Nations High Commissioner, I think that clearly indicates that the Israeli side, they do not have any regard for any human values even. What to talk about the regulations or international laws or chartered of UN, and actually I would say that it is a jolt for the entire collective conscience of the modern world, that they have not been able to stop these atrocities, and there is no visible light at the end of the tunnel, that how are we going to change this situation, which is getting worse every day.
Right. Mr. Awan, what's your understanding? We're looking at this particular statement by Pakistan's Deputy Prime Minister also, that use of starvation as an instrument of war. I want your detailed understanding regarding as to how Israeli regime, its forces, been using this particular tool to specifically target the starving population over there in Gaza.
Thank you so much. This is a very important question, and I think the Israeli regime has been using food and water, all these resources, as a means of starvation and to dehumanize the entire population. I would like to start with the fact that this thinking, this thought process stems from this Zionist ideology, which basically claims that the Israeli, the Jewish race is superior than any other race. And that very fact is basically the starting point, because they see other races as inferior to them, which is why, without any remorse, they're able to bombard civilian populations, they're able to bombard hospitals, and eventually the casualties are children and women and innocent people. So I think this is the first point. As to the second point, this is again, like I said, it is to dehumanize the entire issue. It is to say that these, I've seen videos and social media chat is filled with this in the last 2 years, that the justification that they give for the assassinations and the killings and the violence is that potential youngsters, children, can tomorrow become Hamas fighters. This is all presumptuous, right? And this is the starting point of dehumanizing everything that they're doing in Gaza and legitimizing their objectives. Secondly, I think as to the aspect of starvation and the humanitarian aid efforts are concerned, we've seen that recently even activists like Greta Thunberg was, they would, along with the group and the crew, were held, by the Israeli forces. Similarly, there was a land convoy which originated from Tunisia all the way till the Egyptian border, and they were even not, given access to the Gazan territory to provide aid and everything. So it is in fact, an intent is very visible over here, that they aim to eliminate, and they basically want to make an impression that the Gazans should actually cry that they want to leave out from that place, because ultimately they are the actual landowners of that territory. It is essentially making them compulsory that they leave the land. Second point that I want to make over here is that as to regards to the ceasefire efforts are concerned.
I'll come to that particular point.
All right.
I just want your detailed analysis regarding as to what efforts had been in the past. There was a ceasefire that was already reached. There was a breach on part of the Israeli regime regarding that particular ceasefire, and what are the efforts at this particular point in time happening. On the video link, we are honored to be joined by Mr. Osama Nazzal. He is Palestinian affairs analyst. Mr. Nazzal, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Let's begin with this particular starvation being used by Israeli regime and its forces against the innocent people in Gaza as instrument of war, with the Commissioner General of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency saying that this cannot become the new norm. This abomination must end through a return to humanitarian deliveries from the United Nations, including the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. What is the problematic point from the Israeli perspective? Why did they take over this aid distribution system from the hands of the agencies that were working under the auspices of the United Nations?
Thank you for having me first. The Israeli occupation government is using all policies in order to achieve the goal that it set at the start of this war, which is genocide. which is ending the existence of a whole nation, the people of Palestine, whether in Gaza or the occupied West Bank, where I'm speaking from, including Jerusalem. Israel used all kinds of weapons provided for it by the United States and other countries in order to achieve its target. And when the Palestinian people showed unbelievable resilience and unbelievable steadfastness, Israel resorted to other methods in addition to the bombardment and the bombing and rocketing of the Palestinian homes over the heads of the Palestinian families, which is starvation and the prevention of access of water. Now, the starvation that Israel is causing to the people in Gaza is more lethal than the bombs that Israel is using against them. In order to show the world that it doesn't have the intention to starve the people to death, it created the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is a death trap set by Israel and the American administration for the murder of the Palestinian people, whose only guilt is that they were born in Palestine, they were born in Gaza, and this was not their option. But Israel punishes the people of Palestine for that because Israel, and since the start of the Zionist colonization of Palestine, the Israeli officials at that time slogan was clear: a land without a people for a people without a land, which means that they're going to work to empty the land of Palestine of its indigenous people, and they are working on that today. Israel is canceling not only the UNRWA, it is canceling all the United Nations body in the occupied Palestinian territories, not allowing any international organization to exercise its mandate, claiming that it has the alternative, which is Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. But it is really...
Nazzal, in that sort of a scenario, what happens to be the way forward when we talk specifically the access for the people who have been under indiscriminate bombardment on the part of the Israeli forces since 7th of October 2023? What happens to be the way forward for allowing them to have an access to the humanitarian aid, where the Israeli regime doesn't allow any of the UN agency to go over there and work and provide that sort of respite to the people over there?
Yeah, this is the Israeli crime. Israel is committing its crimes with comfort and with relief because the international system has failed to practice any pressure to stop its genocidal campaign. You know, the people in Gaza have been subjected to the Israeli bombardment for 631 days. Imagine 631 days, and no international government or no international body is able or is seriously trying to stop the crimes against the Palestinian people. So the whole international system is a big failure, really, not from the perspective of the Palestinian people, but this is the reality. And what happens to Gaza might happen to any other country that is refusing injustice, refusing oppression, and refusing Zionism. And the international system is going to handle that country the way it is handling the Palestinian people in Gaza and the West Bank. So this international system was created in order to serve the interest and the purposes of the superpowers on this planet, like the United States and other Western countries, including the Zionist regime in Palestine, not to help the impoverished or the oppressed people, the miserables on earth. So Israel is just, while we are speaking, Israel targeted Al-Baqa cafeteria in the center of Gaza City, knowing that all the people who were in that cafeteria are journalists, writers, and activists, and killed the 22 of them, including some journalists. That is Israel. As long as it doesn't have someone to deter it, it's going to continue it's the crimes against the Palestinian people and the international system.
Right, Mr. Nazzal, I get your point. There are a number of other important aspects. I'll come back to you for your understanding regarding those, as to a particular post by President Donald Trump regarding the trial of Benjamin Netanyahu, and there has been an announcement on part of the district court in Jerusalem, which has cancelled the hearing for this particular week, which was scheduled against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Also, the prospects of a ceasefire, for which Egypt and Qatar are making quite strides at this particular point in time. Mr. Malik, you already of the view that there were opportunities after the ceasefire which was reached between Iran and Israel, regarding there could be a possibility of a ceasefire which could have been reached over here as far as in Gaza is concerned. Now, just going to that particular statement by Mr. Netanyahu, when he says almost the similar words in terms of opportunities. Many opportunities have opened up now following this victory, which they claim that they've had the victory against Iran. First of all, to rescue the hostages. Goes on to say that, of course, we'll also have to solve the Gaza issue. Now, again, the two objectives that he had set at the very outset of that very aggression, which was unleashed against the people of Gaza, to defeat Hamas. But I estimate that we will achieve both the goals. Now, there has been criticism. There are articles and columns being published in the Israeli media which are very critical of the failure as far as this particular situation that is developed in Gaza owing to Netanyahu's policies over there are concerned. Hamas is still existing. It hasn't been completely destroyed as far as his goal at the outset was concerned. He hasn't been able to release all the hostages. Your understanding?
Yes, exactly. These were the stated objectives, and the actual the objective was and remains is to eliminate current or any potential threats to their subjugation of this area. That was the main aim, and for that what we see is that they have in the garb of fighting the militants, they have been killing innocent civilians, they have been targeting hospitals, they have targeted innocent children and women. So they want to actually wipe out a complete generation which can grow and be a part of the resistance being offered by Hamas over there. So that's the true picture. I would like to give a comment that while the efforts are being indicated that Qatar and Egypt have now actively pursuing a new ceasefire, and President Trump even said last week that you will hear talking to media that you will
come to I seek your pardon for the injection over here. That's the next point of discussion. I would like to have your detailed view regarding that one as well. But sticking to that particular 2 million people, as you were of the view that they are aiming to wipe out the complete population,
exactly,
of the complete generation from there. Just a couple of days before, again, the Commissioner General of the United Nations Relief and Work Agency made a press conference in which he said 2 million people are being starved, including 1 million children. No place is safe in Gaza, with hospitals, schools, shelters, homes and places of refuge hit. How is it possible to exterminate 2 million people from that particular enclave? That is what exactly is happening already through the instrument of starvation, through indiscriminate bombardment. But is it so easy to exterminate 2 million people on the ground and wipe out their generation completely?
It would not be possible, but the devastation, particularly what instrument they are using now, instrument of starvation, it is just like, if you recall, in Serbian or Bosnia, they were using rape as an instrument of war. And that was to break the will of the people. And so over here, these very vulnerable groups, the infants, children and elderly people, they are vulnerable. And without bombing them or without any kinetic application, this is another dimension of the war that they have introduced. But unfortunately, no one in the surrounding or European who very otherwise claim to be the champion of human rights, they are not seeing the human dimension of this crisis. Leaving aside the political or military dimensions, but this is a very serious human dimension. And for that, at least I expect that the affluent Muslim, Arab Muslim countries who are in the surrounding, they should exert somehow their influence or their contacts with Americans particularly and Europeans, because they all have stakes in these Arab countries as far as oil flow and other businesses are concerned. At least there should be an uninterrupted supplies of food and the other commodities which are essentially required to save the lives.
Is there any sort of a mechanism when there is a war ongoing, Mr. Awan, which has been already laid out in black and white as to how the aid of the basic amenities might be accessed by the people in that particular area? Is there any mechanism that has already been chalked out?
I mean, there is a mechanism. It is the international humanitarian law, which basically says that what you can do and what you can't do during wartime. And let me sort of elaborate on that. Israel is not bound by international law. As we just listened to our colleague from Palestine as well, the international system has completely shattered. It is broken down. It is basically, and like you mentioned as well, that the system that we see today post World War II was actually in many ways established to actually eliminate the practice of colonialism. And yet we see a state in the 21st century continues to practice colonialism without any consequence or accountability. We have seen that Netanyahu has been, there has been arrest warrants been issued by the ICC, yet he goes around the world.
So what's the alternate then?
The
if
alternate,
this particular system has failed
in that context,
uphold its
unfortunately, there is very limited options, because the ICC, even though it is not part of the UN body itself, but the UN can initiate proceedings against Netanyahu.
But ICJ
does not deal with individuals or war crimes, issues of
even
war crimes.
then there were hearings going on at the ICJ,
at the state level.
and it actually made that those preliminary injunctions ordering Israel to stop its genocidal acts.
Exactly. It did that, but again, like I said, Israel.
So what's the alternate?
The alternate is, again, there has to be a very concerted effort by the Muslim states, especially the Arab states, to actually move towards some kind of reconciliation and halt the bombardment, the violence at least. Because the next step would be the resumption of humanitarian aid and everything else. The last aspect, which I feel is the accountability factor, will never be there in this given scenario, because Trump is also shielding Netanyahu, because he thinks that as part of the peace agreement, if there is any ceasefire, Netanyahu will have to be given a green light.
So what about the internal pressure? The pressure is mounting at home for Benjamin Netanyahu. So no chances of accountability till he remains to be the prime minister, or what after that? Could there be any sort of a scenario that he could be held accountable later on once he relinquishes that particular position of being the prime minister there?
So I think in terms of as things stand, one of the reasons this war continues to rage is because Netanyahu is trying to avoid and distract the public and the audience away from his corruption charges, the domestic pressures that we talked about. Secondly, Israeli courts have rarely convicted any IDF forces personnel for their misactions or their violation of any law for that matter. So Nathan, if you can well imagine that if IDF has never been convicted, or any personnel of the IDF has never been convicted, you can well imagine Netanyahu will not be again, will also find a escape through it as well. If he steps down eventually, or whenever that happens, I feel that this reminds me of back in the day when the Nazi officials went into hiding, and after 20 years there were trials being happening, or 30 years later down the lane, probably that kind of an event might happen, but not immediately after stepping down.
Right. Mr. Nazzal, what's your understanding? Could there be any chance of an accountability for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu? As long as he remains to be the Prime Minister over there, we've seen a mounting pressure at home from the opposition as well. Also criticism in multiple Israeli media outlets regarding his policies of in Gaza. Do you think any accountability of Netanyahu in both the scenarios, when he remains to be the Prime Minister and after he is not the Prime Minister anymore, stand any chance?
The question to me, yeah?
Mr. Nazzal, yes. Do you think accountability for Netanyahu stands any chance in both the scenarios, being the Prime Minister and after he doesn't remain to be the Prime Minister?
Yeah. Look, there is no opposition in the Israeli society now. 20 years ago or 15 years ago, there was the Israeli leftist parties who were having, not much different really from the rightist parties in Israel, but they think of achieving their colonial target in a different way. Because when they had the opportunity to achieve peace with the Palestinian people, and after the PLO signed Oslo Accord and accepted only 22% of the entire area of Palestine, the leftist parties did not seize that opportunity and they rejected to achieve comprehensive peace with the Palestinians. Now the rate of these people in Israel is zero, as the Israeli society drifted towards the rightist extremist parties. Now what we have here and what we see as Palestinian citizens, only extremist settlers, colonists who are controlling the Israeli government and all the walks of life in Israel. So the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is acting according to the wishes and the desires of these people. And that's why.
What about these statements? Mr. Nazzal, what about these statements from the Knesset members saying that when specifically talking about the trial that he's facing in district court in Jerusalem on the charges of bribery, fraud and breach of trust, they say they believe that he's using the ongoing war in Gaza to secure an end in that particular corruption trial. Let me quote a couple of statements from Knesset members over here as well. They're trading his indictment in exchange for a political settlement and an end to the war. Also saying Netanyahu is acting against the Israeli public interests.
Yeah, here, this is a different story. The Israeli Prime Minister is not going to be held accountable by the Israeli society for committing the genocidal crimes against the Palestinian people in Gaza. But when it comes to corruption, fraud, and other domestic Israeli issues, this could be different. Anyway, the pressure is not that big. And we saw how the court was not held yesterday after the American president issued his statement portraying Netanyahu as a great man who should not be tried. So the Israeli Prime Minister is on the safe side as long as he is acting according to the wishes of the majority of the Israeli society and the Israeli people. He is killing.
He's had the wish of releasing of those captives as well. He hasn't been able to get all those hostages released so far. So do you think that sends out a good message among the Israeli public at large that is being unable to achieve that particular objective?
Yeah, I think the people need to understand that the Israelis are not much interested in the hostages who are held in Gaza, because the biggest demonstration that was organized in Israel for the release of the hostages, for pressuring their government to reach an agreement with the Palestinians in Gaza to release the hostages. The biggest demonstration was like a very, very small percentage of the Israeli society. Compared to the demonstrations before the war in October 23, the demonstrations in Jerusalem for the judicial issues and opposing the Israeli government judicial overhaul, they were much, much bigger than the demonstrations taking place in Israel for the issue of the hostages. And the Israeli prime minister is using the file and the issue of the Israeli hostages in order to murder and kill more Palestinians and to achieve his political agenda, because it was possible for him to get all the hostages back and to stop the genocide through a political or a ceasefire agreement that he refused, and he is still refusing until today.
Mr. Nazzal, do you believe that this particular post on Truth Social by President Donald Trump actually led the district court in Jerusalem to cancel the hearings which were scheduled for this particular week against Netanyahu? And do you think this is going to prolong this sort of cancellation? Because the kind of explanations which had been put forth before the court by the lawyers of Netanyahu also pertain to the security and the political issues. So in a statement, the court says, following the explanations given, we partially accept the request and cancel at this stage Mr. Netanyahu's hearings scheduled for this week. So to which particular factor do you think this particular cancellation holds that particular credit? Is it because of the post of President Donald Trump, or is it because of that explanation given by the lawyers of Netanyahu?
Look, this is very important, I think, because it clarifies to the people who have long thought that Israel has like that big impact on the American administration and in the United States. And some people went to the extent that Israel is controlling the United States and not vice versa. But what happened yesterday and the statement and the behavior by Donald Trump shows that Israel is not more than a proxy colony for the United States in the Middle East, as the American president is interfering with the bits and details, not only of the Israeli political situation or economic situation, but even he is interfering with the Israeli judiciary and with the Israeli justice system, if they have a justice system. And this shows how Israel is acting according to the instructions and the orders of the man in the White House. So I think that Israelis can never say no to Donald Trump or an American president. And we saw how they canceled the bombardment of Tehran when when their warplanes were on their way to bombard Tehran, and he asked them to turn them around. And the Israeli prime minister listened to him and he implemented his orders. So this is not a great state, you know. It is an entity supported by the American administration, supported by the Western government, and all that it excels is killing the Palestinian people who are defenseless and they have no means to defend themselves against.
I get your point, Mr. Nazzal. One last question regarding as to the prospects of a new ceasefire deal. By looking at this particular statement by the Egyptian foreign minister, we see that they are pushing for a 60-day ceasefire in this particular situation, and goes on to say that it is going to be the first step in sustainable ceasefire, and also referring back to that earlier ceasefire that was reached on 15th of January that came into effect on 19th of January, the full implementation of that particular agreement. Now, these efforts on the part of Qatar, Egypt, as well as that particular statement by President Trump that a ceasefire could be in sight as early as by the next week, do you see it coming? Is it going to happen this time around, given the fact that the earlier ceasefire was breached by Israeli regime and its forces? Do you think they've got this intention this time around, that they are going to agree to any sort of terms, even it is related to an earlier ceasefire that was reached?
Really, as a Palestinian citizen, I feel like so sad and so sorry that they are still talking about ceasefire, not ending Israeli genocide. Because when we talk about ceasefire, we are talking about two combatant parties two armies of two states. But what we have today is that one entity, which is Israel, bombarding and killing defenseless Palestinians in Gaza. As I said before, they targeted a cafeteria now in Gaza for journalists and for activists who have nothing to do with the war or with the battle in Gaza. So they should talk about stopping Israeli genocide and talking about temporary truce, 60 days or 3 months or whatsoever. This is not what the Palestinian people are looking for. What the Palestinian people are looking for is ending the Israeli genocide permanently and starting real political steps in order to end the Israeli occupation of every part of the occupied Palestinian territories. Other than this, I think the conflict won't be resolved.
Mr. Osama Nazzal, Palestinian Affairs Analyst, thank you very much for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Mr. Malik, going to back to that very statement by President Donald Trump, do you believe that it was because of President Trump's statement on Truth Social regarding that corruption trial Netanyahu is facing in a district court in Jerusalem at the moment, that the court decided to delay the hearings in that trial?
Well, I think both. One, that it is not unprecedented that whenever there is some crisis situation, or there are forces mobilized, or we have some security situation in any country, the courts have taken such exceptions, and it's not nothing unusual. And secondly, of course, the statement of President Trump. So both have played, in my opinion.
Both have played. So if such explanations are sufficient in a war situation, so these explanations had already been made by the lawyers of Netanyahu before the concerned court, which in its latest statement has said that following the explanations given, we partially accept the request and cancel at this stage Mr. Netanyahu's hearings scheduled for this week. The explanation, let me quote that also: the national need for the Prime Minister to devote all his time and energy to the political, national and security issues at hand. When there was so much going on within Israel, why there was a need for President Donald Trump to come up with such a lengthy post regarding this particular trial, which is termed as political witch hunt?
President Trump, as you know, he has been ever since he took over in January, and he continues to be very proactively engaging himself, and he doesn't leave any opportunity where he is engaged or he's commenting on social media or formally about the situation in Gaza or the Middle East crisis. So he is actively involved in this. So I think in a way he is supporting Netanyahu, and he is trying to exert his influence, or at least radiate that kind of positive energy in that context, which could facilitate him, because already he has been through another crisis, and his point of view has been taken. So I think he owes a lot to Netanyahu, or it could be both ways.
Right. Mr. Awan, what's your understanding?
Yeah.
Do you think it could be considered within the ranks of Israeli politicians as an interference into internal affairs, and especially when it comes to the judicial matters? Because Israeli opposition leader here, Lapid, has said Trump should not interfere in a judicial trial in an independent country. What does that depict?
Yeah, I think this is, it obviously is interference in domestic affairs of other states. But I think I will sort of lean towards what Mr. Osama said earlier, that we have to look at Israel as an extension of US interest in the Middle East. Right? We should not forget that. And that has been remained constant. I think this is more of a case of a quid pro quo. You scratch my back, I'll scratch your back. Because you see, the AIPAC, the Israeli lobby, which is so dominant, so influential in American politics, remains a key game changer there as well. So obviously they have to balance. Like, I mean, the AIPAC will obviously supportive of Trump's administration. They need their help, the campaign, the funding, the money, the corporation influence, everything goes with it. Similarly, in the case of US interest in this region, Netanyahu has been the face of Israel for the last 20-25 years, and that continues to show that how dependent American administrations have become on Netanyahu as a tool of their interest in the region. Because imagine if a new president or new prime minister in the case of Israel comes into power, which may not be as influential or as much beneficial to the US, it will all obviously halt their interest as well. Secondly, I would also like to add to it that regarding the entire genocide and everything that's happening, Hamas is an excuse. See, it is for the Netanyahu administration, the entire Palestinian population is now the resistance in a way. You cannot eliminate 2 million people, like you said, in that way. But because he's had a justification for that, he also does not want actually to regain control of the hostages as well. Because if they do get the hostages back, it means the end of the conflict in many ways. So it is sort of a bargaining chip that he's using for prolonging this war, extending the war, distracting the public, the media, and also ensuring that the corruption charges, domestic pressures remain at bay. So I think this is working well, and like I said, because until and unless there is accountability, these incidents, these ceasefires will not hold at all, because the only thing that can stop any action is a strong sense of accountability. Without that, even if there is a ceasefire for 2 days, 3 days, and like he said, Mr. Osama, that ceasefire is often between two civil armed states. This is not the case over here. This is genocide happening.
So what about all those efforts which are being put in by the mediators, especially when we talk about Qatar, Egypt? I've already mentioned the statements that have come forth from their side as well. Egypt pushing for a 60-day ceasefire. Qatar urging both Israel and Hamas to seize this window of opportunity for a truce in Gaza. We've also seen President Trump, before he took over the office, he had made some very strong worded statements at that particular point in time, and we saw that particular ceasefire reached one day, coming into effect one day before he took office officially. This time around, he is given a statement now that this particular ceasefire could be by next week.
See, even if that happens, I don't think this will be the end of the conflict. It will be mere pause, a pause that might hold for a few hours, a few days, a few weeks, and then once again we'll be back to the square one.
Shouldn't we be looking on some sort of an optimistic side, that when the last ceasefire was reached, it at least went on, it held for at least 2 months. Of course, the breach came from the Israeli side, but at least it went on for 2 months. So do you think if this time around there happens to be any breakthrough, it could prolong more than that, more than 2 months?
To understand, to answer your question, we first need to understand that what is exactly the objectives of the Israeli government. If it's regaining control of the hostages, or coming to a deal with the Hamas via Qatar, Egypt, and Israeli government, and the US obviously involved with it, then that's a different thing. But this is, in my view, the objective of the Israeli government is not regaining control of the hostages or coming to an agreement with the Hamas. It is actually the capture of the Gazan territory.
It's not coming to an agreement with Hamas. They want that it will agree to that ceasefire. That is what Israeli perspective is, that the war, if Hamas surrenders, disarms and goes into exile. And
do you think that Hamas is only a group of people with a few named people? It is the entire Palestinian resistance actually. So it will continue to happen day after day and after day.
So, Mr. Malik, do you see any light at the end of the tunnel after all these efforts are being?
Well, although the ceasefire would, if it happens, and for how long it is implemented, that is yet to be seen. But if it happens, it will at least give some respite to the humanitarian crisis, and it may set a very fragile, foundation to reach the, resolution for this conflict. Because unless the war stops for a shorter duration, even the other steps can't be taken in the region. So I think we should look towards the ceasefire efforts with an optimism, and it should bring some semblance of improvement in this situation.
Mr. Air Vice Marshal retired Ijaz Malik, senior analyst, thank you very much for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Mr. Ahmed Hassan Awan, Foreign Affairs expert. Mr. Awan, thank you very much for your time also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's episode. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.